Hello, my name is Hannah Facey, and my presentation is called Obedience to Authority, and specifically during the Holocaust. So can I ask everybody to please raise your hands? Reason, can I ask you, why are you raising your hand?
Because you told me to do it.
Exactly. So right now, I am in the position of a presenter, and you are all my audience. Therefore, right now, I have a little bit more authority than you. If the roles were reversed, and you asked me to do something, I would be less likely to do it because I have more authority. There's an example of this in the night Elie Wiesel, which we have all read by now, on pages 6 and 7 of Moishe the Beadle, a poor Jew of Siget, who had just returned to the town after several months after being deported by the Hungarian police. Moishe went around the town asking the townspeople to listen, prepare, and leave the town before they got deported as well. Although Moishe was only a poor Jew and resting on the bottom of society, therefore he had no authority and was ignored by the townspeople. So now I'm going to go into a little bit about Milgram's experiment, which will help you understand the points to follow. So Stanley Milgram was a social psychologist who started his career in 1960 at Yale University. He conducted one of the most controversial social psychology experiments known to date in 1963 called the Milgram experiment. Based on his own Jewish background, he designed the experiment to try to uncover the reasons for the German people's obedience during the Holocaust and why they would allow such an atrocity to even happen. So the experiment worked like this. Somebody would apply and show up to Yale University and be greeted by an experimenter and who they thought was another participant, but really they were an actor. So the actor would always end up being the learner and the participant would always end up being the teacher. So all three would go into a room and the learner, the actor, would be strapped down into a chair with a paste and an electrode on his arm. And then the teacher and the experimenter would go into a separate room and the teacher would be set up in front of a large shock generator. Over an intercom, he would say a series of questions to the learner, and every question the learner got wrong, the teacher would have to give him an electric shock. The shocks went from 15 volts to 450 volts, and increased in 15 volts each time. So the point of the experiment was to see, A, at what point the teacher would start to protest or fidget and show signs of discomfort, and B, at what point would they completely refuse to keep going. So Milgram hypothesized that there was some kind of character flaw in the German people that allowed them to obey authority to any extent without question. And with this hypothesis in mind, he set out to test 40 subjects in New Haven, America, at Yale University, and then take his experiment to Germany to test 40 different subjects. Although his experiment never did reach Germany due to the unbelievable results he got in New Haven. Instead, he decided to take his experiment over to a neighboring town of Bridgeport to try to raise some more disobedience out of the Americans just by relocating to a less trustworthy and prestigious building than the university. So the frightening results in New Haven showed that 65% of the subjects gave the maximum shock, yet with a lot of fidgeting and obvious discomfort. And although he did receive more disobedience in Bridgeport, again, the results were much higher than he originally hypothesized, with 45% of the subjects giving the maximum shock. This was enough for Milgram to conclude that there was no flaw in the German people specifically, but yet anybody, no matter where they're from, will intentionally harm an innocent human being just to obey an authority figure. So there was really no reason for him to take this experiment to Germany. So as Hitler gained more and more power during his reign, he needed to get the German people on his side. And to do this, he needed to gain their trust. I have another example from the book Night on pages 80 and 81. Eli had been in the concentration camp for a while now and was currently in the hospital recovering from a surgery he had on his foot. He had a neighbor in the hospital who he referred to as the Faceless Man. And on this night specifically, they could hear cannons going off in the distance, and there was a lot of talk with the liberators and how they were getting closer. At this time, his neighbor, the Faceless Man, spoke up and said, "Don't be deluded. Hitler has made it clear that he will annihilate all Jews before the clock strikes 12. Eli exploded and says, "What do you care what he said? Would you want us to consider him a prophet?" The Faceless Man responds wearily and says, I have more faith in Hitler than in anyone else. he alone has kept his promises, all his promises to the Jewish people. So Hitler never actually did lie or deceive anybody. Instead, he started out with really a good intention at the beginning of World War I, which got everybody behind him. And then he turned a little morbid and started turning against the Jewish population. By using the trust he had already established, he simply had to convince everyone that he was right by using manipulative methods. One of these methods is propaganda. By using propaganda, he could control basically everything Germany and German-controlled countries saw, heard, and read at the time. So thus comes the introduction to Dr. Joseph Goebbels. Dr. Goebbels was Minister of Propaganda during World War I, and this put him in charge of basically all radio, press, cinema, and theater in Germany and German-controlled countries. He was really well known for his psychological implications in his propaganda, which ultimately led to the German people's obedience during the Holocaust. So the first implication I'd like to talk about is the halo effect. And the halo effect itself is the light surrounding the subject of the picture, which in this case was always Hitler. And in the picture in the middle, I'd like to draw your attention to the winged bird up at the top in the light, and the wreath-like flowers around the border. Both of these elements give the picture a really angelic feel and kind of give it a holy sense. Next, in these two pictures, Hitler is portrayed as a godlike figure. He looks to be looking down on everyone. And this was meant to trigger an association between Hitler and God in its viewers, which again gives it that holy sense. In both of these pictures, Hitler is in a very authoritative stance with the German people behind him. By doing this, it plays on the bandwagon effect, which is a tendency for people to do or believe things that the majority does, and simply because the majority does it. So, in all three of these examples that I just showed, and in all propaganda that depicted Hitler at the time, he was always in a very authoritative stance, which was meant to put him, or let its viewers start to see him as an authority figure, which all had an effect of a decision-making bias. So once Hitler had an authoritative stance in the mind of Germany, he then had to start to define his enemy. Propaganda portraying Jewish people worked in one of two ways, both of which aimed at achieving the same end goal. So the first one, like the example on the left, Jewish people were seen or portrayed as seedy, degenerate, ugly, or usually associated with vermin. And in the example on the left, or on the right, sorry, they were portrayed as fat, greedy, or just unpleasant. So the reason why the Nazis chose to do this, and the reason why it worked so well, is because by portraying only unpleasant-looking Jews and in an unpleasant manner, it applied a selection bias, which is the tendency for people to, or it eliminated all other possible biases somebody could take. In human nature, we generally pay more attention to negative images. So by portraying the Jews in a negative way, it applied a negativity bias, which caused a clustering illusion. This is when people tend to see unpleasantness in the Jewish population, even if there is none actually there. So Hitler knew very well that he could not do this alone. In these posters, the objective was to show a hard-working German family being unfairly punished by the cost of reparations of World War I. By doing this, it created an in-group bias, which is the tendency for people to give special treatment to people whom they feel are in the same social group. By combining this propaganda with anti-Jewish propaganda, it created a divide between the Jewish population and the rest of Germany. This in-group bias also gave way to other effects, such as the bandwagon effect or herd instinct, which promoted people who felt differently about Hitler's message to just go along and stay silent. And the picture in the middle here is a good example of that, because it says, "Germany, be proud and silent." One of the last steps to this big propaganda plan was to expand the army. This propaganda was actually quite simple, for all it did was promote people to join the army and help serve the nation so that enemies couldn't suffer from expanding. And the picture in the middle here says, hate and destruction for our enemies, freedom, justice, and bread for our nation. So the German people and the soldiers weren't the only ones with an abundance of obedience during the Holocaust. The Jewish population did as well. Only Hitler used a very different method on the Jewish population. The Jews obeyed because they had to. And Hitler made this very clear from the beginning: obey or be killed. The only method used on the Jewish population was the element of fear. Fear of being killed, fear of being tortured, or even fear of endangering one's family. And there's again an example of this in the book on pages 57 and 58. Eli had just been caught snooping in a warehouse and came across a capo named Idek tangling with a Polish girl. Because of his disobedience, because he was working or he was snooping instead of working, he received 25 lashes with a whip in front of his entire commando. So after a short speech given by the capo, he called A7713. Eli stepped forward, and the capo ordered a crate. The capo said to Eli, "Lie down on it, on your belly," and Eli obeyed. So why did he obey? He knew very well that there was going to be consequences to this after he got caught snooping. So the reason was he was afraid of what would happen if he did not obey. Obey or be killed. Obedience is a natural thing for humans. It's in our nature. Obedience is derived from trust, and when we don't trust, when we don't have any trust, it's easier for us to disobey the commands. Hitler achieved this trust through impeccable timing during the economic downturn and after World War I, by offering a solution by eliminating the Jews, and by using very manipulative methods such as propaganda to gain the German people's trust and obedience. So the control he had over Germany basically allowed him to manipulate everything that everyone saw and heard and, interpreted. So he could he could control what they interpreted and anything that he wanted them to interpret. So because of the propaganda, people started to believe that what they were doing was good for them, for their family, and for their nation. And that's what drove their obedience during the Holocaust. And for everyone else, it was simply a matter of obey or be killed. Thank you. Any questions? James?
Had the social experiment that you talked about earlier actually carried on to Germany, would it have just been with anybody who lived within Germany at the time, or people who had ancestry in Germany, so what Hitler would have considered to be the Aryan people?
It would be people, German citizens, people who have lived in Germany for all their lives and grown up in Germany.
What did you think about the whole propaganda piece? Was that new to you, or was it something that you knew about?
It was new to me. Before this semester, didn't even really know what propaganda was exactly, and researching it, it's actually quite interesting, just the methods they use to get people on their side, even like using colors and stuff like that to associate with certain emotions in people. It's really interesting.
Are you picking up on any use of propaganda in your ordinary life today? Can you see elements of propaganda in, say, advertising that you might see on TV and posters?
Yeah, thinking about it, there's quite a bit now, and I'm sure I'll notice a lot more after doing all this research and this presentation.
Other questions? That was a long way, but really well done. Good job.